Now, Resurrection Sunday is the focal point of Christianity. Christianity is built upon the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, but it was launched Resurrection Sunday. A lot of critics of the Bible, even many theologians, criticize the Gospels. They claim that the resurrection accounts in the four Gospels cannot be blended together, cannot tell a coherent story. They say there's too many conflicts. I've studied this and analyzed this for years, and I just do not think that is the case. There's a couple of things you have to keep in mind. First and foremost, the men who wrote the original manuscripts stuck to the facts. They only wrote down what they knew firsthand or through firsthand interviews. Secondly, we need to understand that they had different target audiences and different goals. Third, you need to understand that the culture was completely different than our culture today. We like to think linear. 1, 2, 3, 4. That culture thought more circularly. Think of peeling an onion to get to the truth, to get to the heart of the matter. And that's more how that culture functioned. Understand also, they didn't have watches. They certainly didn't have smartphones and cell phones in order to keep track of each other. So I have put together the resurrection account from the four Gospels into one clean story. Listen in. Send me your critiques, send me your corrections. But first, listen carefully to the story. The story begins before Easter Sunday morning. In fact, a week earlier, the Sunday prior to Easter, Jesus had entered Jerusalem in a way that fulfilled the ancient prophecies. He had entered Jerusalem not as a triumphant king, but lowly and humbly, riding on the colt of a donkey. The people understood what Jesus was doing because the ancient prophecies had said that's exactly how the rightful king of Israel would enter Jerusalem. So the people were ecstatic and they were celebrating. We call that Palm Sunday, or the triumphant entry, when Jesus entered Jerusalem with the claim that he was the rightful king of Israel. Now, a lot of people were excited about this, but the politicians, the religious rulers, they were concerned. They saw Jesus as a threat. They saw someone that had to be eliminated. And that's what they did. Through false testimony, through deception, possibly by hiring a rent-a-mob, the Roman governor, Pilate, was maneuvered into condemning Jesus to death. And not just any death. He was crucified. A cruel, gruesome death, so horrible that Rome made it illegal to crucify a Roman citizen. Crucifixion was reserved for the enemies of Rome. And Jesus was identified to be an enemy of Rome, and so was condemned and killed and crucified. That Friday afternoon, the bodies would have been taken down from the cross, and the two criminals who were crucified with Jesus in all likelihood were dragged to the trash heap outside the walls at the southeast side of Jerusalem and dumped into that smoldering, ever-burning trash heap. But Jesus' body, the Roman governor Pilate had given it to two leading religious leaders in Jerusalem, a man from Arimathea named Joseph and a man named Nicodemus. These two men, probably with the help of servants, hurriedly buried Jesus not far from where he was crucified in a brand new tomb in a garden. They had to hurry because Sabbath was coming. At sundown on Sabbath, on Friday, all work had to cease until sundown Saturday. So they hurriedly buried Jesus, and the Bible tells us that women were watching from a distance to see where Jesus was laid. Apparently, these women, and word spread among the women, apparently they made plans to return to the tomb first thing Sunday morning, first light. They couldn't come Saturday night. They didn't have lights. They didn't have electricity. So they would have to wait until dawn on Sunday to come to the tomb and anoint Jesus' body. It was traditional, it was customary in first century Jerusalem, Israel, to enter the tomb for a day, 2, even 3 days after death in order to minister to the body, in order to memorialize that person. And so the women planned to do just that on Sunday morning. Now here's the important thing to keep in mind. We don't know how many women planned to be there, to go to the tomb. Not only that, we don't know if the women knew how many were going. That'll be important, and you'll see as the story unfolds. So let's pick up the story Sunday morning before dawn. We know that 2 women left Jerusalem to go to the tomb, to minister to Jesus' body. We also know that another group, at least one other group of women, also left Jerusalem that morning, probably by a different route through a different great gate out of Jerusalem. We do not know, we cannot know if the women knew the different groups were coming to the tomb. It's possible the women had agreed to meet at the tomb at dawn Sunday morning. It's possible that the different groups didn't even know the other group was on their way. So let's follow first the first 2 women. They leave, we don't know their names, they leave Jerusalem before dawn, and they arrive at the garden in which Jesus' tomb was located just as dawn breaks. Now, in the garden, at the tomb, are soldiers. The religious leaders who had arranged Jesus' execution were still frightened that Jesus' disciples might try to steal his body and then spread all sorts of rumors. So they petitioned Pilate, the governor from Rome, they petitioned Pilate to set a guard at Jesus' tomb. So there were soldiers at the tomb of Jesus, probably between 5 and 7 soldiers, because they tended to operate in 3-hour shifts. 2 soldiers were probably awake and saw the women coming. The other soldiers were gathered probably around a smoldering fire, if they were even awake. The soldiers saw the women before the women saw the soldiers, in all likelihood. But before anything else happened, the sun began to rise above the eastern horizon. And when the first rays of light penetrated the garden, an earthquake, a violent earthquake, struck, as if something in the earth ruptured and snapped. While the guard was still trying to regain their balance, while the women were still trying to regain their balance, something even more amazing happened. An alien being, a terrifying being, a powerful being, the Bible says, with light cascading over him and shining and sparkling and intimidating, suddenly appeared. And as he approached the tomb, the guard, too frightened to oppose this being, but too disciplined to desert their post, they simply passed out, they simply fainted, or they cowered in fear. This being, this angelic being, walked nonchalantly to the tomb, rolled away the stone, and then, rather humorously, sat down on the stone. Likely he looked around at the guard, and raised his eyes, and looked to the 2 women who were standing a distant from the tomb. And the angel asked, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? Come and see." He waved his arm at the open tomb. "He is not here. He has risen, just as he said." The women went into the tomb. They saw it was empty. They looked back at this powerful, intimidating angel, and then they just ran. They ran back to Jerusalem, and the Bible tells us they told no one what they had seen. They told no one what they had experienced. Soon after the women fled, apparently the angel disappeared, flew away, wandered away. We don't know. The guard then slunk away. Soon after the guard departed, a second group of women approached the tomb. Now we know two names, Mary and Joanna, and there were other women as well. And as they approached the tomb, they saw in the dawn's early light, they saw that the tomb was open. They didn't see an angel. He was gone. They didn't see the guard. They were gone. The tomb was open. And the women went into the tomb to investigate what in the world was going on. And they discovered that it was empty. As soon as Mary saw that it was empty, she bolted. She ran. She rushed back to Jerusalem as fast as she could to tell Jesus' apostles that someone somewhere had stolen Jesus' body. The other women stayed in the tomb. Now we're talking about less than a minute's time from the entrance of the tomb to when Mary ran for it. But the other women stayed in the tomb, discussed among themselves what in the world is going on, trying to process what is unfolding, because they were not expecting an empty tomb. They were expecting to find Jesus' body and to anoint that body. As they stood in the tomb, suddenly out of thin air, two angels appeared, sitting, one at where Jesus' feet had laid, and one where Jesus' head had laid. And the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. We know that you came here to find Jesus who was crucified, but he is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Remember how he told you that he would come to Jerusalem, be handed over to wicked men, that he would be crucified, and after 3 days he would rise from the dead. He's accomplished it all. It's happened. Look, the tomb is empty. Now, go tell his apostles, tell his disciples that Jesus is alive." Hearing that, the women ran for it. They left the tomb as quick as they could. They stumbled out and began running away from the tomb, and they ran over, or almost ran over, Jesus himself. And when they recognized him, they cried out in joy and flung themselves on the ground at his feet and clung to his feet and his calves. And Jesus laughingly said, "Do not be afraid. Go, tell my disciples that I've risen." Now the angels had told the women to specifically remember to tell Peter. Remember, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. It's interesting that the angel said, "Go tell Jesus' disciples and be sure to tell Peter." So when the women left Jesus, who they now had seen had risen from the dead, and they went in Jerusalem, they began telling everyone, all of Jesus' followers, that they had witnessed Jesus alive. Meanwhile, remember now, Mary had earlier ran from the tomb, had gone into Jerusalem, and there she had told Peter and John, "The tomb is empty. Someone has stolen Jesus' body." Peter and John dropped everything, and they ran out to the tomb, Mary following as fast as she could behind them. John was younger, so he outran Peter. He got to the tomb before Peter arrived. He stooped down, he looked in, and saw that it was empty. Peter arrived within a minute or so, and he ran straight into the tomb and looked around. He saw the gravestone, grave clothes, but there were no angels there. Jesus had wandered off, apparently back into the garden, just enjoying and celebrating his victory. John entered the empty tomb as well. The Bible tells us that John immediately believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. Peter, he could not believe that seemingly impossible possibility. Remember, Peter had 3 times denied Jesus and then had gone out and wept bitterly. Peter, after looking at the tomb, left, and apparently he just began meandering around, lost in a fog and in confusion. The Bible references something amazing happening, and possibly it happened that morning. Possibly it happened in the garden. After Peter left the tomb, perhaps that very morning he wandered into Jesus, or perhaps Jesus sought Peter out. Whichever it was, we know that Peter needed and received from Jesus Christ a special grace and mercy and forgiveness. Remember, the two angels had told the women, be sure to tell Peter. Jesus needed to meet personally with Peter. John, he left the tomb without ever seeing, left the garden without ever seeing Jesus. Mary probably got back to the tomb a second time that morning just as Peter and John were leaving. She didn't see Jesus. She maybe just got to say goodbye to John, and she stood there weeping outside the empty tomb. The Bible tells us that she stooped to look in, and there in the tomb once again were the 2 angels. And they asked, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Mary said, "They've taken my Lord." Then she stood up with tears in her eyes, and with a completely confused mind, she looked around and she saw a stranger standing there. She didn't recognize him. Mary thought the stranger must be the gardener, and so she said, "Sir, if you've taken Jesus' body, just tell me what you've done with it. I won't tell anyone. I just want to be able to take care of him. I just want to be able to honor him." And that person spoke and said her name, Mary. It was like blinders fell from Mary's eyes. She could see. This was no gardener. This was no stranger. This was her teacher, her master, her savior. And she cried out, "Master, Rabboni, teacher." She ran and flung her arms around Jesus. Jesus reprimanded her. "Do not cling to me," he said to Mary, "for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go immediately and tell my followers, I am ascending to my God and to their God, to my Father and to their Father." Mary, at Jesus' command, reluctantly let go of him and hurried into Jerusalem. And there she added her testimony to the testimony of the other group of women who were telling people that they had seen Jesus alive. Now, if someone told you that someone you knew was dead was alive again, that would be a hard thing to believe. And that's clearly what was happening that Sunday. The rumors spread. The information went out to all of Jesus' disciples. Some of them believed like John. Some of them they just couldn't believe. But we know that Sunday night, the 10 of the 11 surviving apostles, remember, Judas had committed suicide after he had betrayed Jesus. Another apostle, a man named Thomas, we don't know where he was that night. We just know he was not present. But 10 apostles and probably some other disciples were gathered in a room. They had the doors bolted. They had the windows closed. They were frightened that the religious leaders might seek them out to destroy them because they were Jesus' followers. And in that room, suddenly, unexpectedly, Jesus himself appeared. Now, most of the people there, when they saw Jesus, they thought he was a ghost. But Jesus said, "Do not be afraid. It is me. Look at my hands." And apparently, he was showing them the scars from the crucifixion in his hands. Because he said, "Look at my feet. It is me. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bone like you see me have. Touch me. Here," he said, "do you have anything to eat?" And they gave him something to eat, and he ate it in front of them. Then they realized this was Jesus, raised to life.